How are we doing today?
Wonderful.
We ready to roll?
Yeah, ready to roll.
There's a note sheet in the back for taking notes, and all the information in today's presentation is found in a free ebook. There's a link to that on your information. My name is Steve, and I'm happy to be here with you today. I help schools and group homes deal with their worst behavioral and aggression problems. And today we're going to talk about de-escalation, how to de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime. We're going to unplug that power struggle. And first I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think it is possible to de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime? Show of hands if you say yes, anyone, anywhere, anytime. Wow, lots of hands, awesome. And no way, no how, nowhere, you cannot de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime. There we go. I was about to be scared that nobody was going to raise their hand. I like it when people raise their hand and say, no, it's not possible. You've been hearing at this conference about behavior and how everyone has behavioral patterns, and how we're going to help them is common for most people. And we're going to do that very same thing today. We're going to talk about how to support, remain in control at all times, support anyone, anywhere with any issue, and avoid the wrong response. You want to avoid the wrong response because the wrong response will make things worse. The information we're going to present is based on current research, evidence-based practices, and professional experiences, much of which has come from public schools. These are universal principles. So just like you've been hearing about how the brain triggers behavior, there's common human behavior patterns, we're going to be looking at the same thing when it comes to de-escalation. What works for everybody is the most common approach. We're going to talk about that. It's not just about how you de-escalate students in schools. First, you have to know how to de-escalate anyone, then you apply it to students in schools. Students in schools who are boys. Students in schools who are boys with autism. So we're going to focus in on those universal principles first, so that we can deal with anyone, anywhere, anytime. Show of hands, please. How many people would say that you're a beginner with de-escalation strategies? You have very little experience? Okay, no shame in that. And how many people have moderate experience? Some experience? Okay. And how many people would say you have a lot of experience, you're very experienced? Okay, so most people are moderately experienced. Can we turn that light off, please? Yeah. Thank you. I'd like you to think back to the last incident that you were involved with. Was it an argument you had with somebody? Was it an incident in school? Was it a fight? Physical altercation? Doesn't matter what it was. I want you to think back to that last incident that you dealt with. What happened? What led up to it? What was the result? What did you do? Does anyone have a situation they'd like to share with us? Confidentially, of course. Yes, Devin?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm a counselor at a middle school, and I had a parent come in who was very angry at her son's science teacher.
Oh, the parent was angry at the teacher.
Was angry at the teacher for some comments that were said, and she was feeling like nobody was listening to her. And it was the first time I had heard anything about it, so I didn't even know what the situation was. And I just happened to be standing at the front office when she walked in, and she immediately just attacked me.
Like physically attacked you?
No, like
Oh.
just verbally assaulting me, like
Yes.
somehow it was my fault. Like, I don't even know what you're
She
talking
knew you?
about. No.
Oh, okay.
No, she just knew that I was his counselor.
So it must have been all your fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she verbally assaulted you, and you did?
I invited her back to my office so that we weren't standing out in front of my office staff, and we weren't in the hallway as the children were going through passing periods because she was being very loud. So I invited her back into my office where I could sit her down and listen to let her vent or tell me exactly what the issue was, because I absolutely had no idea what she was talking about.
Wow. Interesting scenario. And you were safe?
Yes.
Didn't get
Yeah.
hurt?
No.
Emotional scars?
No, I'm good.
Excellent. So parent comes in, starts verbally assaulting you. You invited her back to your office to get her out of the main hallway, and you let her speak? So you listened to her?
Right.
Excellent, excellent. And she felt heard, I take it, and that helped de-escalate the situation?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And I want, if it's okay, I'd like to refer back to that
Sure.
as we talk about some of these issues. Excellent. Okay. Just adjust this here so my remote works a little better. Before we talk more about this scenario, I want to talk about our brain. We have several brains in our head. Well, that sounds kind of weird. But we have specialized portions of the brain. So there's the part that controls the autonomic functions, breathing, heart rate, so we don't have to remember to do that. There's the part that does the thinking, does the analysis. There's the part that reacts to emotions. So there are specialized parts of the brain that do different functions. This is a good thing. However, sometimes these parts of your brain can be at odds with each other. Think back to a time when you got really scared, like somebody cut you off on the highway, like all of a sudden you're like, or somebody came and verbally barraged you. What did that feel like? What were you thinking about? Do you know that when you have that alarm, what's called alarm response, there are some 1,400 chemical reactions that occur in your body instantaneously. That's that fight or flight response. You've heard of that? So that's a survival mechanism that's programmed into the primitive part of our brain to keep us safe. We recognize danger, we're going to take action. Now, it's commonly known as fight or flight, but actually there's a few more parts to it. So the first thing, and this happens to everybody, is we freeze. Literally freeze, stop, look, and listen to figure out what's happening. Scientists observe this when they watch video of what happened in 1996 in Atlanta at the Olympics when a bomb went off. There was a surveillance video, and they noticed that when the bomb went off, everyone literally stopped and froze. Before then, fleeing or doing whatever. However, there were a few people who didn't unfreeze. They remained frozen. And they're studying the pathways in the brain for that. Most people will go beyond freeze to flight or fight. Statistically, you're more likely to flee than fight. So what's called fight or flight is more realistically known as flight or fight. There's also a third outcome, which is called fear. And this is when you shut down. I don't know what to do. I'm not going to do anything, or I can't do anything because I'm not sure what to do. Maybe akin to playing possum or playing dead, or just flat out immobilized. So there's some scientific terms for all this, but basically you've got to recognize what happens in your body when these things occur. I've been verbally assaulted. I was at my bank and I was verbally assaulted by another customer, and it is very startling, and that brain will take over. So you've got to recognize what happens in your body and don't let yourself be a barrier to addressing the situation, particularly because stressful situations cause a stress response in our bodies. Dr. Lazarus, who has studied stress extensively, defines stress as our perception of our ability to cope. Notice that word perception. Stress isn't the event, it's our thinking about the event. That is the stress. Think about it. Stuff you can deal with, is that stressful? No. Stuff you can't deal with, is that stressful? Yes. It's our perception of our ability to cope. That is stress. Stress is normal, stress is expected. How we deal with that is important. We first have to recognize their stress reaction as well as the amount of stress, because there's some implication to that. You may have seen this before. This is called a stress cycle. So baseline is the way we are normally. Our normal speech rate, volume, activity level, and so forth. When we encounter a stressor, we have a stress response. If that stress response is severe enough, we have that alarm reaction that we just talked about. If we have that alarm reaction, we have lost self-control. The survival brain has taken over and shut off our thinking brain. Right? Because when you got cut off on the highway, you weren't thinking, oh dear, I should maybe slow down or swerve. Right? You just reacted. So it's a good thing that your thinking brain gets shut off. However, as a professional, on the job, when addressing a situation involves thinking your way out of that situation, we need to avoid getting into a situation where our thinking brain is shut down by our survival brain. So we have to recognize our stress and whether or not that's important for us. Just note that after you've had this stress response, you go through what's called the exhaustion phase. You've used up, remember, 1,400 chemical reactions. You've used up a lot of energy in your body, and you have to recover that energy before you return back to baseline. So it's important to realize after you've gone through some stressful situation, it's likely that you may have more problems because you're not at your best, you're not at your baseline. That's our physical response. We have to look at our cognitive response, our thinking about the situation. Our thinking about the situation can also hinder us from dealing with this effectively. What would you think if the firefighter showed up to the fire and said, oh man, I don't know if I can deal with this? Wouldn't give you a lot of confidence, would it? We have to recognize that stress distorts our thinking. Have you heard the term cognitive distortions? There's also known as filters. People think of them as filters. They distort the way we think about a situation. So if you observe some student behavior in the classroom and you're thinking, well, there goes Johnny again. Of course he's going to do that. The whole month that we've been working for has just gone down the drain. That negative thinking will impair us from effectively resolving this situation. So you have to think about, in a stressful situation, how can I manage myself to keep from getting to the point of dysfunction? Don't be your biggest barrier. This leads us to surprise number 1. Manage yourself first before managing others. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. You've been on an airplane, before you take off, they say if the mask comes down, what do you do first? Put the mask on yourself first before helping anyone else. You've got to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. If you are freaking out, you're not going to help anybody. You may actually make the situation worse. Now, earlier I was saying this isn't about specific students. You've got to learn what are those universal issues that apply to everyone. However, the relationship you have with this individual can be an effective tool. So basically, if you know the person you are dealing with, you will better be able to support them. So Devin told us about a parent who came into the school you hadn't met before. So she had no idea, was this normal for this person? She just yells all the time? Or was she like really escalated? Were you worried like she was going to pull something out of her purse? Hey, you don't know if it's to that level or not if you don't know this person. If you've been in a few IEP meetings with this person, you may know they look likely to get hot very easily. And that's just the way they try to get their point across.
Right.
Devin did not have the benefit of that relationship. So this seems real obvious. The more you know the person, the more you will likely be able to help them because you know what works for this person, what motivates them, whether or not they had, breakfast the night before, they're going through a rough patch in their life. So what if you don't know the person that you are dealing with? Does that mean you don't have a relationship with them? I suggest that there is a relationship. So Devin told us this is a parent, I'm a counselor, assigned to her son's records. So she has a specific role, a specific responsibility. She's got a job description. She's got expectations of what her administration wants her to do in supporting parents. All of those things guided what she did next. Probably more so were your personal beliefs, your personal aspirations. How many people would have, if confronted by a parent all of a sudden, would have just called 911 or called for security? And yet Devin invites her back to her office. That's commitment. Where does that come from? That comes from dedication to her job, dedication to being helpful. So you may not always know the person that you are dealing with who's escalated. I didn't know this person who was verbally assaulting me in my bank branch. But yet we have certain roles, rules, responsibilities, our personal, our civic, our religious beliefs guide all of that. So I suggest we do have a relationship, even if we've never met this person before.
My first response was, my initial response was I was getting defensive because she was attacking me.
Totally understandable.
I didn't know anything. And so I kind of started into this, I haven't, I don't know. And then I just thought that was escalating it when I was trying to defend myself, which only lasted for maybe 5 seconds. And then I got control of myself and realized she's not mad at me. She doesn't even know me. I'm completely removed from the situation. She's just taking it out on me because I'm the first person that she...
Excellent, excellent. So you recognize this isn't about me. I should not be taking this personally. And I can do something about this if I stop being defensive and find out what the problem is. So I'm going to tell you about a tool we call the de-escalation compass. And Devin followed her compass. What is a compass? Anyone can tell us? Okay, so a compass is a navigational tool. Now, most people will say the compass tells you where to go. The compass does not know where you are going. The compass does one thing and one thing only. The red part of the needle points in one direction, always that direction. So how is that useful? If the needle always just points in one direction no matter where you are facing, well, that gives you a reference point. Because as you travel, you always know, well, with the compass, which way is north. North on the earth. I'm going to suggest that all of these up here, those point your compass, your professional compass. The more familiar you are with those, the more readily you will be able to read your compass, get a reference point, and decide where you are going to go in this situation. And this brings us to surprise number 2. One response does not fit all. One response does not fit all. So I've worked with a lot of teams in crisis, a lot of individuals, and it's not uncommon for me to hear someone say, well, I usually do this, and it usually works, but this one time it didn't work. Well, that's because everyone we deal with has their own needs, their own motivations, their own stressors. And they need support with their issues. One response does not fit all because not everybody is trying to do the same thing. Devin told us about listening and understanding. And she was able to understand what this parent's stress was about, what she wanted to accomplish. And only then she was able to understand how to support this parent. So we have to listen and assess. This is no different from positive behavior support, where it's an individualized approach to supporting a person. This is how we unplug the power struggle. When we try to force somebody to calm down by doing the same thing we tell everybody else, we're plugging in that power struggle. When we argue with the person, well, this is the way it is, or you just have to deal with it. This is how we plug in the power struggle. We're going to make the situation better by unplugging the power struggle. And Devin did an excellent job of recognizing right away her defensiveness, and she unplugged that. And that started to improve the situation immediately. We talked about what happens to the brain in stress. And so just as we lose our ability to think clearly in stressful situations, we have to realize that when others are stressed, they are not thinking clearly as well. Escalation time is not teaching time. It's not time to talk about it. Well, let's see what we can learn from it. When somebody is escalated, they are not in learning mode. We're going to have to wait until this person de-escalates and restabilizes back to baseline before we get them to learning mode. During this escalation, this is when you're going to utilize all the tips, tricks, skills, techniques you've ever learned from any de-escalation training. People commonly believe, well, I've just got to go to this training, they're going to tell me what to do, and then somehow I'll be able to magically make everything okay again. I've had a school administrator once tell me, well, let's just send our staff to this training and then we won't have these problems anymore. And it's not that simple. However, I want you to realize that anything that you've learned anywhere, all the trainings you've been to, they can all be useful. You need the right tool for the right job at hand. So how are you going to know what is the right response in any situation? You're going to be doing that assessment. Assessing the situation understanding what the person's needs are, and then making a determination of what's going to make this better. When we stop assessing, we start assuming. And when we start assuming, this is when we're going to start making the wrong response. We can only have the right response for that situation when we're assessing what's happening. Hey, let me ask you a question. Where did so many 2-year-olds learn how to solve their problems by hitting? Did you teach them that? Did they watch you? It's instinctive. That is human nature. I studied anthropology in college. It's documented that humans are naturally violent. It is human instinct to take and get your needs met. The keynote speaker this morning talked about this. Whatever you want, you will find a way to get it. And when you're 2 years old, you have a very limited skill set. And it doesn't involve much language. So that hitting, taking, grabbing, that's all instinctive. That's normal. It's the not hitting, that's not normal. That's civilization. That's society's rules. We've come to develop that code as a way to get along with each other and actually survive. They haven't learned that yet. So it's the not hitting they have to learn. And we still have to remember that sometimes as an adults. Sometimes we get really focused in getting our needs met. This leads us to surprise number 3. Making it stop does not make it stop. There was a young man who he had to go live in a group home. He has autism, and he had this habit of going up to everyone he met and slapping them in the back. And it hurt people. And they had not very nice names for him. And it became such a problem, he had to go live in a group home. And the staff were getting tired of getting slapped in the back. So one day they started to think, well, wait, why is he doing this? What is he trying to get out of it? What need is this meeting? And someone theorized, well, what if he's just trying to have some social interaction? He's just doing it way wrong. But it's about just having a social interaction. So on that theory, they decided to test it. They taught him the high five. Okay? High five. Social interaction, plus you get the slap. And the harder you slap, the louder the slap, the better, right? That's all acceptable. Taught him the high five. Guess what happened to the back slapping? Gone. Why? Because the high five met the same need as the backslapping, and it was easier to do. And people were like not turning their back to him, but they were giving them their palms. So that high five met that need and replaced that behavior. As the keynote presenter this morning discussed, behavior is a form of communication. Not always a great form, but it is indeed a very valid form of communication. And when we're having problems with the way people are behaving, sometimes we need to listen to their behavior. Listen to what they are doing. Notice what the group home staff did not do. They did not make him stop backslapping. They did not try to make him stop slapping backs. What would that take? Physically forcing him, right? You can't make anybody do anything. And sometimes that physical response will actually make the situation worse. It will teach him that the person who is strongest wins. That might is right. You make it harder for him to slap, he's going to try harder to slap. So ironically, the things we do sometimes to make people stop doing things will actually make them do it more. Also, physical response, a physical intervention, a restraint technique always increases the risk of injury, of abuse, of re-traumatizing this person, learning that might is right, and it's going to damage the therapeutic relationship we try to develop with this person. So a physical response should never be used for behavior management. A physical response should never be used for compliance or punishment or get your own frustrations out on this person. It's likely illegal where you work. It's likely against your consciousness, although it is entirely within your human nature to do. We have to stay in control so we're thinking clearly and realize that it actually statistically has been shown to make the situation worse. The only time you should use a physical response, a physical intervention, a restraint, is to make the situation safer when it is physically unsafe, when you are stopping behavior which is endangering others. And you may even allow a person to destroy a classroom. I've heard many a tale of this. And when I say allow, that means by omission, you're not forcing them to stop. Because of those risks of forcing the person to stop. Yeah, we don't want people to break stuff. Yeah, that's expensive. But you have to measure that out against the cost of your health, of your safety. I met a teacher once who tried to keep a student from dumping a computer on the floor by physically trying to keep it on the table, and it was this battle, and she hurt her back, and she was out of work for 6 months, and this was 2 years later, and she still had back problems. Over what? A computer? Again, we can only make those decisions if we are thinking clearly and managing ourselves first. So we always want to work smarter, not harder. So like with the group home staff, they didn't try to confront the problem, the backslapping, and just make it stop. They worked around it by providing an alternative. When we respond, we have to think about the here and now, but we also have to think about later. In the short term, your focus is going to be on safety, on intervention. But in the long term, you're focusing on growth and empowerment. You are all in those kinds of jobs or in those positions in life where that's your mission. You can make things stop now, but it doesn't mean it's going to solve the problem for the future. So like I was saying with not stopping the student who was destroying the classroom, they decided we'd rather take the long-term approach and not damage the relationship we have with this individual, not endanger ourselves so that we can support this person in the long term. This brings us to surprise number 4. Postvention prevents problems. Postvention prevents problems. So what is postvention? Well, it's what we do after to keep something from happening again. There's a little irony with, conundrum with prevention. How can you prevent something before it ever happens? If you don't know what it is that's going to happen, how can you prevent it? You can't anticipate everything in the world. And the things that you say, well, we can reasonably anticipate this or this, it's because they've already happened. So postvention is what we learn from things that have happened, and then we implement that learning so we can prevent them from happening again in the future. The keynote speaker this morning talked about learning from your mistakes, how if you mess up this behavioral intervention, it's okay. They'll probably give you another chance to try it again. So it's always a learning process. That hindsight improves our foresight. So maybe we didn't get it right this time, but what we learned from the situation we can use to prevent it in the future. I always say the best problems are the ones you don't have anymore. Yes?
I'm kind of going along with this, one of the, it's like a risk management phrase that I heard actually from my husband who's in the fire service, but it's, if it's predictable, it's preventable, though it's not entirely true, but it kind of fits in with that, but things that we know that we can predict, we hopefully then can prevent, so we kind of with that.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. So in the fire service, they have a risk management philosophy that if it's predictable, it's preventable. I say it right? In other words, if you can reasonably anticipate it's going to happen, then there's something we can do to keep it from happening. So this is where those relationships come into play. Maybe, you know, you just, Devin, you just met this woman before. Well, now you have a personal relationship. And that is going to impact how you deal with her in the future. Prevention seems like a very obvious idea, and this is the common paradigm in bullying and in healthcare and insurance. However, prevention takes work. It takes foresight, investment, and when we're busy reacting to all the stuff that comes along, there's no time for stopping and planning ahead. So it's actually a very tricky proposition. So this is where you have some very common approaches to utilize to increase your prevention strategy. So proactive environments and positive behavior support. Proactive environments essentially means structuring your environment so that we can prevent. Going back to if it's predictable, it's preventable. So if we know somebody tips over furniture, let's have all the bookcases bolted to the walls, which they already should be here in earthquake country. Parents who put cabinet locks on the cabinets and the drawers, they're creating a proactive environment. That baby gate over the stairs is creating a proactive environment. So we want to extend that same philosophy and be proactive. The more time we spend being proactive, the less time we have to spend being reactive. And of course, positive behavior support is a very appropriate philosophy for this. And you guys know the ABC triangle? So spend the most amount of time on the antecedents so you don't have to spend as much time on behavior or the consequences for those. Also, I call it environment behavior support. In schools, it's called school-wide behavior support. What applies to everybody? So we want to integrate what we think are those challenging situations with how we run our buildings and programs so that we can address those things up front. This is a leadership philosophy. Taking the initiative, gathering and devoting resources to preventing problems from happening. So we want to transform problems into success. If we have problems, we continue to have these problems and we say, oh, poor me, we have to deal with these problems. This little kid is rotten, or this, nothing ever happens in this building, or nobody cares around here about the way this goes. We're taking a victim mindset, and we're not claiming any responsibility or role in making the situation better. However, if we assert personal leadership into the process of addressing these situations, then we will transform problems into success. And I always say that within any problem, there's always opportunity. So how can we change these challenges into solutions? And this leads us to surprise number 5, which is inside out change. Inside out change. What is inside out change? Changing your way of thinking and responding in order to make a difference in the situation at hand. I feel Devin exemplified that in the story that she told us. Many people confronted by this irate parent who could have easily turned violent would have called 911 or for security. Probably wouldn't have invited them back to their office. I hope you had more than one door in your office. But Devin, she saw a problem. She owned that problem. I'm not going to dump this off on someone else. I can address this. I can do something about this. This is within my realm of ability to influence. And so I'm going to do that. Inside out change requires confidence, empowerment, the ability to develop and deepen relationships, courage, also known as leadership. Questions or comments? Bless you. Okay, so one of our goals was to avoid the wrong response in a situation. How do we avoid the wrong response? Well, I'm going to give you 3 guiding principles for every situation. 3 guiding principles will guide you in every situation, help you discover the right response, avoid the wrong response. These are essentially 3 questions you ask yourself. Will my response meet the person's needs? Is my response respectful and dignified? Will my response maintain safety? If you want, you can just write down needs, respect, and safety. Those are the 3 guiding principles which will help you always have the right response for the situation at hand. Use it as a little test. In this situation, I don't know what to do. Well, how about I do this? Is it going to meet the person's needs? Yes, good. Is it respectful? Yes, good. Is it going to increase safety? Yes, good. Probably the right response. If you answer no to any of those questions, probably the wrong response. Questions or comments? Yes.
I think one of the, with regards to safety, I think the one important thing is teams defining safety, because I think everyone has a different response of, is that person being safe or are they threatening the safety of others? I worked with a team earlier this year where they felt like the kid was being unsafe, but really when we took a deeper look at it, the kid wasn't doing what anyone wanted him to do, but she wasn't necessarily being unsafe. She was, she was just digging her heels in and wouldn't move. And so it was and it was right in the doorway, so it was sort of impacting, but there's another doorway. So it was just sort of working with the team on, okay, is this a safety issue? If this was the only door, maybe, but there's another door, no one's in imminent harm, So what can we do in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can sort of meet force with patience and wait her out a little. But it was very uncomfortable for some people on the team because they felt like that's not safe. She's in the doorway, and so working through that, I think it's really important because everyone has a different definition of what their perception of
That's an excellent illustration. You were right. Everyone has a different illustration about what, or definition of what it means to be safe, or ideas about safety. And this was a situation where a young girl was refusing to follow directions.
Yeah.
She was being non-compliant, yet that was perceived by people as being unsafe. So a lot of people will define safety in physical terms. A lot of people will define safety in emotional terms. So,
People felt like, well, the kids can come in the room through that door and they might feel bad about that. And it was like, okay.
so they were projecting,
Right, but is it worth moving her?
yes.
You know, then you sort of weigh out, so is that more of a safety risk to try and move her? I mean, all those things, but it was a really important discussion to have rather than sort of go in and write a plan and, you know, here's what we're going to do. It was really important to have that discussion with the group because they were really unable to move on from that issue.
Excellent. And team discussion was very important, so everyone got on the same page about what we felt about safety. Yes?
Well, I have a question about assessing the person's needs.
Okay.
So kind of connecting to what the keynote speaker said this morning, that sometimes we assume or we think we understand what their needs are in that moment. So I'm just kind of curious if someone's behavior is really escalated and you're in that moment, which is, you know, somewhat crisis, how do you know if your response is meeting their needs? I mean,
Because it'll get better, and if you're wrong, it'll get worse.
Perfect, Evan. So how do you know if someone's truly escalated, you don't truly understand what their need is, how do you know if your response is going to be effective or not? And Devin points it out is look at the response.
Okay.
If it improves the situation, it's probably the right response.
Okay.
If it makes the situation worse, or if there's no change, it's probably not the right response.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, which, by the way, still requires assessment.
Yeah.
So as we're going along, we're always assessing, we're continually assessing. Great question. So here are the 5 surprises in review, in case you missed those. Manage yourself before managing others. One response does not fit all. Making it stop does not necessarily make it stop. Postvention prevents problems. Inside out change. Actually, I hope these weren't surprises for the most of you. However, we sometimes forget these things or forget their importance. So this is why we're going over this, is the ability to deal with anyone, anywhere, anytime requires that we have mastery of these issues and that we're able to look at these 3 guiding principles for every situation. So we started out with the goals today to remain in control at all times. A lot of people assume when they hear that is we control the situation. Like we physically control people or we verbally control people. We cannot make people do things. We control the situation by controlling ourselves. When we control ourselves, then we control the situation. We hear this quite frequently when people come to crisis management training expecting to learn how to literally manipulate people, and they realize if I change the way I respond, I change the situation entirely for the better. Support anyone, anywhere, anytime with any issue, so you never know when these things are going to come up. You've got to be prepared and understanding all those things about yourself and being able to manage yourself. I'm not saying de-escalate everyone, everywhere, every time. That would be unrealistic. And we're going to make mistakes. But if we're going to be able to respond in any situation with anyone, anywhere, then we've got to have a framework to follow. And we want to avoid the wrong response, which can make the situation worse. So let's see, show of hands again. So how many people now think it's possible to de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime? Yes? I actually see less hands now. So those tired arms, are those tired arms, or have you realized, actually I can't do this? So let's see that again. Yes, you can de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime. Actually a little less than last time. And no, you cannot de-escalate anyone, anywhere, anytime. So the one, we got a new no.
If they have a weapon, I'm not gonna.
If they have a weapon. So what do we do if they have a weapon? So remember, we got to take care of ourselves first. So part of controlling the situation means that sometimes we don't physically confront somebody because that would be dangerous.
And if somebody's under the influence, like I've had that.
Somebody's under the influence of alcohol or drugs, that distorts human nature.
Yeah.
And that makes them unpredictable. So those universal ways that people typically act, those get distorted. However, we still have to start from there. Good point. Yes, question, comment?
What about kids that are, little kids that are non-communicative?
What about little kids that are non-communicative?
Have no language?
Did I hear?
Yeah.
Have no language.
Yeah.
You mean they don't speak verbally?
Right, so, and they're like, maybe they're, what's looking like out of control. Might just be a sensory thing, but you don't know.
Well, just because someone doesn't speak doesn't mean they don't communicate. So we heard this morning, I talked about it earlier, behavior is a form of communication. So speech is actually code for communicating. And it's an advanced code, but did you know that 90% of what we communicate, us talking people, 90% of our communication is actually done non-verbally. 90% of our message, even when we are speaking, is actually communicated non-verbally. So I wouldn't allow that lack of language to prohibit you from understanding this person. In fact, language often misleads us because people say one thing when they don't actually mean it or they mean something else. Whether they don't understand themselves, the truth for themselves, or they're trying to be misleading. And so sometimes listening to the words can actually set us back because it's misleading. So we have to watch the actions, watch the results, because those speak louder than words. Does that help?
I'm thinking with kids way on this,
Okay, so we go back to postvention prevents problems. We couldn't communicate with this person effectively during the crisis. We didn't understand what they were experiencing. So what can we teach them to communicate to us when they're feeling this way? So that next time this happens, they give us that code and we know what that code is. The information in today's presentation is found in an ebook. It's free. There's a link to it in your presentation materials. It's no strings attached. Feel free to distribute to anyone. Also at this website, you'll find links to discussion groups online on Facebook and LinkedIn, on our website forum where you can find more resources and information, ask questions, present problems, find solutions. We want to just help people out with all these issues. Any final questions, comments, concerns? I will be available afterwards for questions. I have business cards in the back there and more of those flyers if you'd like to have those. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your participation today, especially you, Devin. Thank you. Thank you. That was an excellent story, illustrated well. And we got done early.
There we go.